Wow. Ben Oliva has shaved his beard, everyone. What is
Yeah.
happening?
Surprise. No more mustache mullet, though. David, thank you for that pick in the intro.
Yeah, I mean
I always like that one.
let's just start with that. So Ben Oliva here, who you see pitching at Williams, Ben played football, and as you can see, obviously baseball at Williams College, and as David said, was a both psychology and astrophysics major. We want to circle back with that. And I should also tell you that Liv also shares an illustrious career as a track athlete at Bucknell, running Division I track there. And both actually attended Boston University's program in Raise the Roof for BU. BU, if you're watching right now, we're only hiring BU graduates at this point. So we gotta diversify. Both studied sports psychology and counseling at BU. But Ben, so walk us through the hair changes here. Like what's happening? This is like a dramatic shift here, and I just want everybody to get comfortable.
Walk you through the hair changes. So I had to use some of my mental skills in terms of working up the confidence to give myself a buzz cut. The lack of hair cutting options during the coronavirus crisis has
Yeah,
left
right.
me with limited hair cutting availability.
A friend of mine stopped by my house a little while ago, and from the street, and just his first reaction when I opened the window was like, "You're looking pretty furry, Fader." I'm just curious, whose hair in the chat box here? Whose hair is the longest it's been in 10 years? Go ahead and tell, and let's hear like, whose hair has been longest that it is. Go jump in the chat box there and let us know. I want to know whose hair is like mine. I'm sorry, my daughters are calling me the woolly mammoth. So okay, so you studied. Walk us through just quickly. How did you end up studying psychology and astrophysics? Because that's like a big that's a lot of diversity in what you're studying there. Many people, including me, wouldn't even be able to tell you what you study when you study astrophysics. So how did you choose that? How did you get to those majors?
um, the way that I ended up in them was following the things that I was interested in. People don't oftentimes see the connection between those fields, but to me, they're actually very similar. Um, and the way that they're similar is in the way that your brain approaches a question, right? So when it comes to physics and astronomy, which astrophysics is just the combination of using what we know about physics to learn about stars and galaxies and gravity. What you're asking yourself is, how do we use science to try to understand what's going on externally at the largest scale?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you think about what psychology is about, it's very similar, but sort of looking in the opposite direction, right? So looking inward, studying how do humans function, how do I function, and how do I try to figure that out in an objective, science-based way, rather than just what it appears to be or going with my gut. Because oftentimes I've found both in astrology, a lot of what we believe to be true on the surface or our immediate perception is actually not entirely accurate and can often be unhelpful. So I've always
Right.
been
So I
fascinated
think
with
what you're
trying to
saying
think
is,
about that.
yeah, you're saying, Ben, is that astronomy and is astrophysics as a way to look at the big picture, and psychology, or look outward, and psychology is a way to look inward, and that's part of the reason where you got to where you are.
Yeah, exactly. And social psychology and sports psychology are pretty intricately linked. Um, some of the first studies were about how social pressure can really enhance performance. And so I think it's also about, let's study the physical world and try to objectively figure out how that works, and let's study the human world and
Right.
objectively figure out how that works.
And Liv, did you also get here through space and time continuum, or how did you get to this? How did you become interested in this field?
Yeah, certainly not through space travel. But for me, I think it was more of a personal experience journey to get here. I've been an athlete my whole life in lots of different sports growing up, and then track and field in college. But as I got higher and higher in different levels of competition, I realized how much my mindset had to do with my performance and my training, and just sort of my enjoyment in the sport in general. And at the time when I was competing, I didn't have anybody to talk to about that. And, you know, I had a professor at Bucknell who taught sports psychology as a class, and I would use him sort of to help with my mindset, but he wasn't that wasn't a permanent solution for me. And I just felt such a need to learn those skills even sooner in youth sports and growing up, and to learn mental skills alongside the physical technique skills is just so important. And so I saw a need. I love working with people, and I love sports, and being a counselor and a performance coach was the way to keep sports in my life and work, you know, deeply with people. So it was a good fit. But I came to it because I think I had something missing in my athletic career.
Yeah, and I think both of you guys in our discussions have shared how your personal experience as athletes has led you to realize the ways in which these skills did help, but would have helped even more. And, you know, we keep using the word mental skills. And, you know, for everybody who's listening, I think, you know, one of the experiences that I had was working with Major League Baseball players, is that oftentimes in moments of stress, you know, I would ask them how they handle it. So for example, say a pitcher gave up a home run. I would ask them, so what do you do? Like, how do you handle that when you give up a home run? What happens for you? And a lot of them would say things at first like, you know, I just shake it off. But then when I would ask them, how do you do it? How do you shake it off? The ones that had a routine, a method for shaking it off, for example, things like actually taking a breath or self-messaging, things like that, did better than the ones that just wait and see what happens. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, about what you can do in these situations. But I want to start with you guys and ask you, because both of you guys, in addition, like me, are not only working with people in mental conditioning and coaching, but you're also doing therapy and helping people with everyday problems. For you, where is that line? You know, where do mental skills and mental conditioning meet therapy or counseling? And how do you differentiate that two? Let's start with you, Ben. What are your thoughts on that?
My first thought about it is that the two are remarkably similar. Oftentimes I think that the difference between the two is more about context and less about content. And so one of the things that I encounter a lot is people saying, well, you know, I'm not an elite athlete. I'm not a professional sports player. Or a professional coach. I don't necessarily feel like I'm the right person to be getting mental skills training. And I think that's a real misconception in terms of who it can actually benefit, right? Because, you know, I'm no longer a professional, or I was never a professional athlete. I'm no longer really a athlete in any high performance context. You know, I like to sort of think of my Chelsea Piers basketball as elite performance spaces, but oftentimes, you know, the real mental skill there is to not get hurt and not get too caught up, but that's a different story.
Yeah, based on how I see you come back from that, it seems like an elite sport to me.
Gotta try to take the charges, you know, but yeah. So to me, the biggest differentiator is really, are you working on a specific problem that you're facing? Or are you approaching it in a way to say, I don't have something that I can't deal with at all, that I need help with, but I just want to get better, right? So it's sort of the difference between somebody has diabetes and is going to the doctor and they say, hey, you got to go exercise. You got to get in shape, or you really have a problem here. Then you go to the gym and you start to do some cardio, do some weightlifting, try to sort of understand what it means to have a healthy body and exercise in that way. That's similar to somebody who's really struggling with anxiety or depression and then seeks mental health counseling. Then there's the people who they're in good shape, but they want to reach their squat max and they want to reach their bench max and they want to set a new mile time or go run a marathon. Okay, so you're still going to do the same exercises, but at a higher level, with more intensity, with more direction, and really sort of push yourself to try to be great at it. So to me, that there's a real crossover there in how I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, look, from my perspective too, wherever you are, you can get better. And so at whatever ability, whatever level of mental strength or flexibility you have, whatever ability you have personally to metabolize stress, whatever ability you have, in other words, to get through adversity in the most positive way possible, we can all get better at that. And I agree. I mean, in my practice, working with people in business and working with people in performing arts and the work we've done together with the fire department, I think, there are kind of three levels of this. I'm feeling terrible, I'm feeling okay, or I'm feeling really focused, sharp, and great. And so wherever we are there, we're trying to move between those two and catch people where they are and help them. What I sometimes do in keynote talks is I'll just say, how many people here are doing something physically for themselves to help their physical strength and flexibility? And just think of that yourself. We're going to approach, I'm sure, 100 people here. So out of 100 people today, how many people here are actually doing something every day, physical exercise? And then you think about, okay, how much am I doing for my mental strength and flexibility, for my ability to find calm in the moment, for my ability to not take things too personally, for my ability not to maximize or reach in the way I worry, but only worry about the things I control. What's my level of being able to do it? Not can I or can I not, but how well can I do that? How about you, Liv? How do you see the differences between mental conditioning and therapy and counseling?
Yeah, I mean, Ben said a lot of my perspective on this as well. I think the three of us think very similarly about this. But one thought that I often think about with mental conditioning is this idea of achieving another 1% in what you do. And while it's 1%, if you think of, Fader, you always say this, we're very interested in that 1%. That's to us, there's so much in that 1%. And if a professional athlete gets 1% better, if LeBron James got 1% better, it's significant. And I think all of us in our performance realm, so whether it's parenting or anything else, if we can work on trying to get 1% better using mental techniques, ways of framing what we're doing and how we're acting in the world, it's significant. So I think, it's not that anyone with mental conditioning, it's not about, perfecting anything. It's just trying to chase after that 1%, and you can always chase. There's always another 1%.
Yeah, I mean, what you're both saying too, which is important, is, and I agree with, but, in mental conditioning or mental skills are helpful when we are stressed, but they're also helpful when we're not stressed, when we're looking to achieve more, or to enjoy our lives more, or to be more present in our lives, and to get the best from our talents. Sticking with you, Liv, I'm curious because, Liv, you have a background in track, and, you coach a lot of runners, and you and I have done some work with a lot of marathoners. You just came back from a big summit where you were talking to a bunch of Olympic athletes. And I'm curious about, in your perspective, what can we learn from long distance athletes right now? Because, now we're talking about mental skills, but we're also talking about mental skills during a very stressful period. I mean, this, I think for a lot of people feels like a marathon. And for a lot of people, it feels like every day I wake up and it's sort of the same stress. What in your sense, what can we learn from marathoners and other long distance runners about the mental skills that help with that kind of thing?
Yeah, a lot, I think. Caveat before I even say any more about this, I am not a marathon runner. However, I want to be one day, but I am not personally experienced in this, but I do work with a lot of people who are in endurance sports in general. So one of the things I think about here, or this quarantine time, kind of feels like an endurance sport in some ways. And one of the things that some of the top marathoners or endurance sport athletes that I've worked with do is they never, in their race planning, they never look at the entire race. They never say, they're never standing on the starting line and saying, okay, I got 26.2 miles to go. Doing that is extremely daunting, especially if you're beginning your training or starting to think about running a marathon, like maybe myself. That seems almost impossible to me, right? So what they do is this thing that we call segmenting, and they break their race up into smaller, much smaller pieces and create a race strategy around those smaller pieces. So instead of, like for us, for instance, looking at the rest of the summer with the uncertainty of when do we go back to work, do we go back to work, all of that, that can seem really daunting for a lot of us. So using a mental skill like segmenting can be really helpful. So for everyone on this call, instead of thinking about what are we going to do in July, thinking about what's the rest of this week look like? What can we do for the rest of this week that might be in service of achieving a 1%, like I was talking about before, or it might just be in service of self-care and being able to take care of yourself and continue the endurance piece of this. To look at the next 10 weeks is too hard, and our brains can't really wrap itself around that. But we can manage thinking about what are we doing the rest of today, what are we doing the rest of the week. So I think that's a really important piece of what marathon runners do really well. And what that does is when you start to build up on, what am I doing for the rest of the week? What am I doing next week? And you start to add skills, or you start to add little things you want to do, like maybe mindfulness every day before bed, or learning a new recipe, or even like getting in better physical shape. That creates what we call compounded interest. So it creates a larger thing, but you're not going after that larger thing. You're going after small things in the direction of that larger thing. And eventually that starts to build, and that's how we create healthy habits. And it's actually how athletes get through grueling endurance events.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I mean, I think that the idea of segmenting is so helpful. And I know actually, so to everybody who's listening and watching here, Ben and Liv and I have talked about the fact that we're going to share some of our routines with you all. That, we find that with our clients, it's really helpful to be transparent. We don't recommend anything to people in our techniques that we don't use or haven't used at some point in our work, in our work and performance, whether that's public speaking or it's running or whatever it is that we're doing. We use all these techniques and all these skills. And I think this idea of segmenting that you're bringing across, Liv, is so useful. And it's something that I do every day. I find myself gravitating towards the summer. Am I going to be able to go to the beach? I gravitate towards my kids' school. Are they going to be able to go to school? But these are things that are that's like the 24th mile, right? That's the 23rd mile of a marathon. Right now, I'm really just focusing on, running a 15-minute mile, running the next mile. And, for the next mile, actually the next mile for me is just being right here, right now. Mm-hmm. It's actually a mantra that I use, right? Be where my feet are, be right here, right now. And so having that self-statement helps me to track into the moment and talking myself through those things. And, so I want to ask you guys, Liv, you talked about segmenting. I mean, how are you using that? And what other things are you using day to day to help you stay in the moment, to help you, what are the mental skills that you use with clients that you're using day to day to help you stay present and focused and in your best self during these times?
Yeah, I think it's super important to talk about this, and I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say too. But in working with athletes right now in this time, the mental skills that we're doing, I find actually are being more utilized in just daily life. We're not applying it to our sport quite as much right now. So I think it's really important to talk about what mental skills we're all using. So for me, segmenting is actually a really big one. I find that around 2:30 in the day, I start to feel kind of blah and unmotivated, and thinking about working for the rest of the day or thinking about all the stuff I have to do this week, but actually becomes my marathon. It becomes very hard to think about that. So I'll actually just try to be more present, which is, I'm sure we'll talk about this more today, and happy to answer more questions about mindfulness, but mindfulness is a big part of the 3 of our lives for sure. But I try to just feel what I'm feeling or be aware of what's going on for me and respond from that. So if I really feel like I need to take a break, like I need to go for a little walk to get some air and to be rejuvenated, I need to be aware of that first before I can make that decision. So I just try to take moments like that during the day, especially when I'm feeling kind of blah. And like I've been in front of screens all day. So I'm doing a lot of that, which has been really helpful. And one thing that within mindfulness that I really like to do, and I've been doing it a lot lately, is just labeling my thoughts. Right now, just to share with all of you personally, is there's a lot of transition in my life. We've had to move out of our New York City apartment, and trying to find another place to live is pretty stressful. And I find myself thinking about that a lot. So I'm not actually as present as I'd like to be when I'm with clients or when I'm working. So I'm trying to label my thoughts. So when something like that comes in, I just say like, oh, that's worrying. Oh, that's self-judgment. Even moments like I can feel really warm and happy, and I'll say, oh, that's gratitude. Just labeling the good and the not so good, but just to be present with that. That's what's happening in my present experience, and it actually helps me to ground in the moment and stay.
Yeah, I think, so everybody, this idea that Liv's sharing about labeling is so powerful. To be able to just build the muscle of self-awareness first, to be able to build that muscle of being self-aware is something that's really useful. To be able to say, oh, I'm now more aware of what I am experiencing. I think that's something that can be useful in my experience on all levels of mental skill. So whether we're really struggling or whether we're doing great, that self-awareness and that labeling. And the other thing that you said, Liv, that I think is really useful is this idea of like where the playing field is where you're at. So this is for me, it's directly relatable to this idea that right now we're sort of all injured athletes. Liv and I were talking about this the other day, that, we're all injured athletes right now. Like everybody on this call is an injured athlete in the sense that we all can't play. We all can't play in the same way that we were playing. We can't be on the field. We can't, we can't dunk. We can't run. We can't do the things that we love to do. We can't, and so, as I work on with injured athletes, professional athletes, well, what do? Well, you start to think about that right now, your field of play is rehab. Like that's your game. Your game used to be football. Now your game is rehab. Your game used to be baseball, but now it's improving things with your family. And so it's, I think, thinking about now, where do you make the playing field, right? The playing field for me has really become, how do I make things really fun and entertaining for my daughters? Like, what are the games we can play? What are the ways that we can, do that? How can my wife and I spend more quality time here? How can I be more efficient? Like, if you look behind me, this wall was just blank before. There was one or two pictures up, and now it's stacked with these frames, right? Because that makes me feel better. That's my field of play. My field of play used to be going and speaking to groups of people, large groups of people. We're doing a lot of that actually through Zoom, but not in the same way, not the way I really like to do and spread the message. So I like that idea about making the marathon wherever you're at. Ben, I'm curious, Liv has talked a lot about her experience, about, what she's experiencing. I'm curious about you, and, first, actually, what are the kinds of things you're working on with clients specifically, with athletes and also, just people who are dealing with everyday stresses? What are like the top couple skills that you're teaching or that you're working on with your clients?
So there's big crossover with what Liv was saying in terms label these mental skills in ways that a lot of mental coaches talk about it, right? What we're all talking about here is intentional goal setting, right? Being able to break down either long-term goals into shorter-term process-oriented goals. And so one of the huge things that I've been talking about with both athletes and clients who are not in sports is intentional time planning. And, I'm reading these chats coming in, and there's a bunch of people in this webinar saying exactly this, that if I'm going to do anything that's helpful for me, it has to sort of come from this area of my brain that is not super stressed out, right? Because what we know about stress, whether in sports or elsewhere, is that our executive functioning declines, right? So that part of our brain that's in charge of managing our time effectively and making good decisions is oftentimes offline when we feel really stressed. And so putting aside a time where, okay, I'm going to do a mini mindfulness exercise and then spend 20 minutes planning my week. not in a super rigid way where I can't be flexible, right? But in terms of what are the things that I know are going to be important to me this week that I want to make sure I have time for, and putting some time in to do those things, right? And not just going with, well, I'll just do it when I feel like it, right? Because that's a big thing that comes out of sport and performance coaching, is that there's this false belief that people who are great at things just love what they do so much that they always just want to do it. Right? Yes, they enjoy it. That's a big part of it. But they also have an ability to say, I'm committed to this even when it doesn't feel like what I want to be doing, or even when I'm really stressed out. So that goal setting, routine planning thing that you and Liv were talking about, that's one of the big ones that I've been working on with people. The other one that's come up a lot more than usual is imagery, especially with athletes, but also with people in terms of working on their conversations that they're having with family members and with other people, right? One of the things that humans can do that no other species can do, is imagine future events that haven't happened yet.
Yeah, and that cuts both ways. I mean, the thing about that, I mean, that's a great point, that about the difference between humans and other animals. You know, we can see the future, or we can anticipate the future, and that cuts both ways. I think if unmanaged, you know, there's one of my favorite quotes. I think it's Mark Twain, who said, you know, worrying is paying interest on a debt you do not yet owe. Right? Like we're paying interest a lot of times on things that haven't yet happened, right? So that same ability also causes a lot of suffering. But I think what you're saying is that you can use imagery as a way to master, or not master, but improve that human tendency, that adaptive tendency to plan for the future. Specifically, I'm curious, what are the certain situations that you're working with your clients on? Like, what are the kinds of things that you're using imagery for?
So I work with a lot of high school and college athletes who are really having a hard time with their inability to physically practice in the way that they want to. So from a sports perspective, doing a 3-point shooting drill through imagery, that's a big thing I've been working on. Going through a batting practice round, or imagining yourself hitting with the bases loaded in the bottom of the ninth, or responding after an error. Okay? With firefighters, it's I'm in a building and I've lost my sense of direction. What do I do now? Right? So when those situations arise in real life, it's not the first time that you've ever thought about it in any way. With clients who aren't in athletics, it's a lot about, okay, when my child decides that they're not going to do their homework, and they come out and they say, I don't want to do my homework, I want quarantine to be over, how am I going to respond to that? And when my parents tell me, well, I don't care if you want to do your homework, get back in there and go do your homework. How am I, as a kid, how am I going to respond to that? How am I going to approach my parents in a way that I feel good about afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my experience has been that for myself and everyone, we have a tendency as humans to push stress away. Mm-hmm. Like when we feel stress, or we don't want to do something, we kind of just try to shove it. It's like, you know, cleaning your room when you're little, you just shove everything, at least I did, into the closet and try to get away with it. It just busts out of the closet, right? And so, you know, there's some really good questions coming from the chat, and, you know, I want to make sure we get to them. One of them, actually, that I'll just say that I think is really interesting here, is about mindfulness. And I think, you know, we mentioned mindfulness in a lot of these different, in a lot of the different webinars we talk about, but this question is really practical. And you know, you guys have very practical approaches to mindfulness. So I want to ask you this, and I'll just spend a little bit of time on it because I know we have so much to talk about and little time to go. But, you know, here's the question: besides the ability to be present, what's your definition of mindfulness, and how do you realistically apply it? So I'm curious from you guys, you know, I'll share my thoughts about this, but, you know, we'll start with you first. You know, how can people realistically, beyond, you know, going on Headspace, you know, going on Calm and an app like that, you know, what's our definition of mindfulness, and, you know, how do you apply it? So let's start with you, Liv.
Yeah, this is a really great question, actually, because you know, I find that the word mindfulness is used much more frequently these days, and the practical application of it is not as often talked about. So I appreciate whoever asked this question. I think it's great. You know, one of the main things in terms of performance, I'm just going to answer this from a performance standpoint, and just know that for anyone who's not feeling like a performer, this can be applied in any way. But one of my favorite quotes that relates to mindfulness is by Peter Haberl, and it's attention is the currency of performance. So what mindfulness really does is it, from a performance standpoint, helps us to be present, of course, but to keep our attention where we want it. What happens with, you know, the human brain is that we are often in the future with, you know, worried about something that might be happening, the debt that we have not paid yet, as Fader talked about, or we're worried about something that we did in the past, recent past, far past, whatever. We just made an error, we can't get past it, or we're worried about, you know, what's going to happen in the second half. We're very, you know, when we're performing our best, we're actually present. Flow states only happen in a present moment. So one of the biggest things that we can help from a mental standpoint, help people with in performance, is being able to put your attention on the task relevant cue. So that is where you want it. Like, what do we always say? Lise? Keep your attention on the right thing at the right time, every time.
Yes. Yeah, and
yeah.
actually, Liv, I love what you're saying. I just want to make this, you know, we're talking about performance, but just to say what Liv is saying, and I think extremely well, is that the task relevant cue means for everybody. Like right now, the task relevant cue is just listening to Liv, right? And not looking at our other screen, caught you, not you know, not doing whatever it else is that we're doing right now, right? The task relevant cue is what is salient and important in our environment, and that's a very difficult thing to develop. And so I think, you know, your point, Liv, is really, this helps us to get better at developing our attention and our ability to attend to the task relevant cue, wherever that is, football field, baseball field, presentation, your kid who's with you right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to have a chance to talk a little bit about it too. What's your sense of mindfulness and how it applies?
So in addition to this idea of purposeful attention, there's another piece of it, which is about the attitude that you're taking towards this present moment experience. Right? A lot of times people talk about it as non-judgment. I prefer to talk about it as curiosity and openness. And there's a big challenge there, right? Because particularly in a time like coronavirus, the present moment is not necessarily enjoyable. You may be experiencing anger, frustration, boredom, shame, regret, right? All these unpleasant emotional experiences. And so to say, oh, let's just be present with that is really hard. And so being able to say, well, part of what mindfulness is I'm going to be curious about what it feels like to be angry. I'm going to be curious about what it feels like to feel regret or to feel embarrassed about the way that I acted before, right? And I'm going to be present with those emotions. It can be really, really hard. And a lot of people, like you said, would much prefer to stick those emotions in the closet. No way, I'm not. What's the point of turning my attention towards feeling shame, right? But what all the research says, and what my experience, and I'm sure your experience tells you, working with people and with ourselves, is that actually it's the bracing against those emotions that causes more suffering.
Right.
And so to be mindful is really to practice being more open towards those unpleasant emotional experiences and letting those come and be with you, and that's part of you too, and that's not as scary as we think it really is, or as dangerous as we think it is.
Yeah, you know, I mean, when you're talking about suffering, one of the equations, I can't remember where I read it, but I read it or heard it in some mindfulness thing, and you know, we always talk about this, is the idea that pain plus resistance equals suffering. Pain plus resistance equals suffering, meaning mindfulness is the ability to help yourself not to resist what you're feeling. And all the strategies in mindfulness, whether it's labeling, whether it's visualization, whether it's being in the present moment through breath work, all the many different things are all tools that you can learn about to help people to be able to resist less. You know, I want to reach out to everybody on this call. We have a few minutes left, and what we found is that it's so great to hear from you guys live. So, you know, if you have a question that you can ask live, we have one here about dealing with parenting. We've had a couple about dealing with, you know, the what ifs. You know, please let us know in the chat if people are able to ask those live, because it's really super helpful for people to hear from each other. I'm curious, you know, people have talked about, you know, handling the what ifs. I'm curious, you know, if you're someone who's been struggling with dealing with the what ifs, say me too in the chat. Go ahead and just write in the chat box, me as well. That's happening to me too. So if you're someone who has had, you know, your mind's been drifting towards the what ifs. What if I can't work in the way I'm working? What if this money thing happens? What if my kids can't go to school? Go ahead and write in the chat box, me as well. I want to hear from folks about how many people are already experiencing that. Yeah, I mean, we're already getting a lot of people who are saying that.
What if I'm the only one to respond? I love
yeah,
that.
exactly. I love that. Right. So, you know, let's wrap up with that from you guys. And, you know, I'll tell you too, you know, how are you dealing with that, the what ifs? We talked about segmenting, but what are the other things that you're doing or that people can do to help them right now using mental skills with the what ifs? How can people, you know, recenter or change their thinking about the what ifs?
Sure. Okay. So I think this is one of the most easy to apply mental skills off the bat, which we talk about a lot, which is self-talk. So first of all, with the what ifs, I would talk about mindfulness, and I would talk about what you were talking about, self-awareness of thoughts. And I'd be aware that I'm getting, I think somebody sucked down the thought train, right? I just went way down the rabbit hole of what ifs. So being aware of that is the first step. But then being able to have some self-talk that's going to be able to be helpful to you in some way. For me personally, the thing that helps me is to ask myself about the what ifs on the other side. So to try to gain some balance in the what if game, right? So we go, what if I lose my job? What if all my clients decide that mental health is no longer important and I don't have any clients left? Okay, well, what if this brings in a whole new group of people who want to work? What if this gives people a lot more time to work on mental skills? What if there's a lot of other opportunities that present themselves for this? What if I end up really enjoying the fact that I'm working virtually instead of having to go in the office? And so having more of a balanced approach to it and doing it on purpose at times, right? Okay, I'm going to play the what if game on purpose for 10 minutes. I think Raquel and Laura, our two child-focused psychologists, talked about having worry time, and I'm seeing it in the chat box too. I love this idea. I'm gonna spend 10, 15 minutes. I'm gonna worry, and then being able to balance that positive side of the what ifs. How about you, Liv?
Yeah. For me, the biggest one is mindfulness, is being able to place your attention more presently. However, just to add variety to the response, one of my favorite things that I've actually used a lot in my own performance, but sort of not knowingly until I started studying this work and realizing that that's actually what I was doing, is just a self-statement that says zoom out. And zoom out to me is perspective taking. So I feel that, and maybe others feel this way too, but when I start to really worry and get very anxious about certain things in my life, I feel like I have tunnel vision, and that's the only thing I can see. It's the only thing I can think about. I can't really wiggle out of that. So reminding myself to be present and to zoom out, and like you were saying, Ben, to try to look at the other side too, which helps with perspective taking, I find to be really, really helpful, because we're first person. Like when something's happening to us or we're worrying about it, it feels like that's everything. The world is that, but it's not. And to remind yourself that it's not, and to take some perspective is really helpful. And that just goes along with one more thing I just want to mention about that is a lot of the work we do with athletes, it involves self-compassion. And I know Katie talked about that a little bit on the mindfulness webinar a few weeks back, and we do this a lot, but part of the zoom out is recognizing this element of self-compassion, which is common humanity. I find it really helpful when I'm really stuck in something I'm worried about, like where I'm going to live or finances or something like that, that there's many people probably close to me and not close to me that are suffering with the same thing right now. And as a global unit, as a national unit, as a local unit, we're going to get through this together. And I'm not the only one experiencing what I'm experiencing. Sometimes that's enough just to say that, so that I can take perspective and start to think about things a little bit more balanced.
I love that. I love that. I mean, and just to say, I mean, I think what you're saying, Liv, is an important reason why we all love doing these webinars and doing these discussions, because, in their essence, they are an act of universality. It's an act of saying we're all struggling with this. So even doing this, you already boosted your mental strength and flexibility for the day by joining in this discussion, because you realize, hey, we're all experiencing that. And that's something that I do quite a bit. I actually say to myself, I have a kind of an inside joke with myself. I share this with clients, is that I just say to myself sometimes, hello, old friend. And the old friend I'm talking to is all the ancestors I've had who made me the way I am. We're talking about 10,000 years of people that have looked, as Ben said, towards the future, that have felt physiological arousal and future-oriented worry. I'm just welcoming my humanness, right? Rather than trying to push it away or say I shouldn't be a certain way. I'm saying, oh, of course I feel the what ifs. That's number one. And then number two is just having a plan, right? Rather than reacting to the what ifs, responding. So there's many go-tos I have. Some of them are just saying, like, what's next, Fader? Right? Like I'm sitting here and I'm trying to think about what's going to happen. I catch myself, to use Ben's idea about self-awareness and labeling, or what Liv was saying about labeling, and to be able to say, oh, okay, like I'm doing that again. And then refocus my energy and my focus on the ability to say, this is important right now. Like, what's important now? That acronym WIN, which we talk about. What's important now? But I would say that, back to the idea of mindfulness allows me to do that. If I'm not having that time every day where I'm really learning how to be in the present moment, won't be able to find that part of myself. Folks, we're going to wrap up in a minute, but I'll just say a couple things first. Thank you for joining us. This has been a great discussion, and I really want to thank Ben and Liv for joining us. And before you check out, we have a couple important announcements. One of those announcements is that we're going to put up a poll now. And that poll is going to be asking you about, like, what webinar you'd like to see next. So I think David's going to throw up that poll. Which of these webinar ideas do you like? We want to hear what you want and what you're interested in. So, take a look at these for the next several weeks. What webinar would you like to see? One about teletherapy, one about therapy and the difference between in-person and telehealth. One about the relationship between nutrition and mental health. How about managing loneliness and being single? Or navigating quarantine en español, porque también vamos a hacer eso en español. Yo creo que tengo aquí una persona que habla español, entonces vamos a hacerlo en español también. Or more mental skills, more discussion of how these skills impact, and or also a very important topic, this is one of David's favorites, the history of clowns and why they scare us. I really am scared about the picture that David's going to throw up at the end of this thing. So go ahead and vote here. Hopefully it's not for the clowns, because then we'll really have to dig deep. So just, we'll give you a second to vote. I want to throw up also a slide here, or David will throw it up, about how to contact Ben and Liv. If you have questions for Ben, Oliva, or Liv Massey, feel free to reach out to them. Ben and Liv both work at Square Practice, providing therapy, but also are working at SportStrata doing group and team coaching. I don't see, do we have the results of the poll, David? Here are the results of the poll. So most people want to hear more mental skills. So we're definitely putting that into the rotation. Thankfully, there's only a few of you guys who are interested in the clown situation, but we'll try to put that together. And I think it's evenly. So these are all topics you're going to see. Next week, we're going to be talking about what it's like to be a college-age person, late teen or college-age person, and how to deal with that. We're actually going to have live teens. We've captured some teens, and we're going to put them up on here. We're going to have them in quarantine. So we'll have some live teens next week who are going to be talking about what it's like to go to college, to not go to college, perhaps, and the other struggles of what it is like in terms of coming back from school and how to manage those things. There's going to be a lot of lessons learned about how to be a young person in this. And for those of us that are young people or that are connected to young people, please tune in. You can reach Ben at Oliva at SportStrata.com and Liv at Massey at SportStrata.com. Please reach out to us. We wish you lots of luck, and hopefully you'll take some of these skills for managing your own what ifs over this next period. And we look forward to seeing you next week for our next discussion. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thanks,
Thank you.